Let's go ahead and let's dive into let's hit the Peach Bowl first, because it is number 1 Georgia, it's number 4 Ohio State. There's a lot of ways that I want to attack that. And my transition here is, if the SEC stinks, should Georgia be concerned? Did you just Georgia is excellent. Georgia has been excellent. And I say this like half kidding, but going into this game, is there any where is your level of concern about Georgia, its path to get here, and specifically, and this is the actual matchup angle that I wanted to discuss, is Georgia's secondary ready for CJ Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, and this passing attack? Because the Oregon offense that Georgia absolutely choked the life out of hadn't really found its footing yet. Oregon finishes the season as one of the, better offenses in the country, top 10, top 15, depending on what statistic that you use. Tennessee, one of the best passing attacks in the country. They choked the life out of that. Hendon Hooker's, no passes. That the whole Heupel offense is supposed to hit big plays. No pass plays greater than 28 yards in that game. The one interception, time he threw it in the end zone, was picked off by Keely Ringo. So those are a couple data points that a Georgia fan looks at and says, okay, we're good to go. But the rest of the schedule that Georgia has faced is nothing close to what they're going to face against the Buckeyes. So as we start to peel back the layers of this Peach Bowl matchup between Georgia and Ohio State, I want to ask, do you think this Georgia defense is ready for what's coming with this Ohio State passing attack?
I do. I mean, it's going back to the original point. Georgia's still the best team in the country. The SEC is not very good, but Georgia's still the best team in the country. This is a more difficult matchup than I think they would probably like. If you're Georgia and you're being honest, you'd have probably preferred TCU to Ohio State. And I don't think,
100%.
Yeah. You wouldn't say it publicly, but everybody knows that's the case. And so Ohio State is a tough matchup for the Bulldogs because, as you said, offensively, this is a team with a whole hell of a lot. But what I come back to when I try to break this game down and I try to figure it out, Ohio State is not nearly as bad as I feel like the world has wanted to pretend since it lost to Michigan. It just lost to a very good team. But I go back to that game and I go back to last season, both the Michigan loss and the Oregon loss. And there's CJ Stroud is an incredible quarterback when things go as planned. When his read is there, when his pocket is clean, there's probably isn't a better quarterback in the country as far as delivering the ball on time, delivering the ball where it's supposed to be, and delivering the ball to the right receiver. But when he gets under pressure, the one thing about Stroud that is a concern that I know NFL scouts have is when things go off script, like you see, like Bryce Young at Alabama, they worry about his size and his frame and maybe his ability to withstand, the physical play of the NFL. But when the play breaks down, Bryce Young can scramble around and make things happen. He does not panic. CJ Stroud, when he is pressured, panics. If it's not there where it's supposed to be and things are going off script, he struggles mightily. We saw it against Oregon and we saw it against Michigan twice. This is a Georgia team that defensively on the season, if you look at their overall numbers, they don't get a ton of pressure compared to what you would think they would be at with the talent they have. They don't blitz a lot. They kind of just, they bring their 3 or 4 guys, and then if they get it, they get it. But this is also defense too, situationally, as I've talked about with this team in recent weeks, they've taken games off. Let's be honest. They have cruised against some opponents knowing that they were going to win easily. But when it came to their big games and they stepped it up, the defense gets more pressure. So for me, in this game, we could talk about Stroud. We could talk about the receivers. We should also probably talk about Trevion Henderson not playing. But for me, Ohio State's offensive line is the most important unit in this game because if they can't hold up against that Georgia front, we've seen what happens to Ohio State's offense when they're not blocking. It goes to crap really quick.
I think to Tom's point, just specifically here, Ohio State's tackles are very good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both those guys will be playing in the NFL. We've talked about this for about a month or two now, how Ohio State probably needs to land 2 tackles in the transfer portal because both their kids have a pretty good shot of going pro. Ohio State on the interior, though, is not as good. And that is where Georgia is very good defensively this year. In fact, I don't know how many people in the chat can name Georgia's edge rushers. I mean, you got Beal, you got Jones Jr., or Marvin Jones, obviously, but ultimately, you have got to get Jalen Carter blocked. And Jalen Carter is probably the best defensive player in the country, with all due respect to Will Anderson. And I don't know how well Ohio State will do that. if Ohio State devotes extra resources to that, I'm interested to see some of Georgia's blitz packages, right? I'm not really sure how much edge pressure Georgia can get without blitzing. Now against Tennessee, they brought a lot of blitzes and they said, hey, like we'll see if you can hold up on the back end. That game kind of game scripted as well, extremely well to Georgia. And I think some of the weather stuff probably helped, but Tennessee is not anywhere near as good as Georgia is, in my opinion. So I'm interested to see how well Ohio State can hold up on the interior against Jalen Carter, and then how many extra rushers that Georgia's defense will have to bring to get pressure. Because Tom is totally right. Like, there's a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL who play on script extremely well and don't play well when they're off script. And that's not like, that's a knock on Stroud, but it's not a one that's going to prohibit him from going to the league. Not that we care about going to the league in a preview of the title game. Like, it's not disqualifying for him to win this ball game or to play well, but it is something that Georgia's, that's top of mind for them. Like, you got to get this guy off script. He's not very good throwing on the run. He's not really that much of a scrambler. He seems to want to hang out in the pocket. We got to make that pocket uncomfortable. This is the game where I think they really miss Jackson, honestly, because I don't see anybody on Ohio State's offense who is that Jameson Williams type, who's that dude who's the absolute burner that scares you. Like, Harrison Jr. is fast for his size, right? And Egbuka is a nice after the catch guy. Who is your dude who's like, oh, damn it, like if he's on a safety, we are cooked? I don't know that Ohio State has that guy right now. And maybe that makes you, if you're Georgia's defense, you're a little bit less scared.
Yeah, and like going back to the Stroud thing, like no quarterback likes being under pressure, but most of them, they would prefer it coming from the outside because at least then they could step up in the pocket if there's room there. But if Jalen Carter is collapsing that from the middle, that's what quarterbacks hate the most, because then there's no escape route.
Yeah, the ability to see over the middle for those sweet Ohio State crossing routes when you've got somebody like Egbuka moving across the field. If all of a sudden 88's in your face, you're not going to be able to get a clean pocket. You're not going to be able to dump that off. I'm fascinated because to me, when I think about Ohio State's offense, and I did a lot of comparing it to Tennessee in some of my thoughts about this game, it is a lot more on some of the shorter passing game than what Tennessee has, and trying to let those guys go and make some plays. If Georgia does decide to bring pressure, maybe you've got a chance to hit some explosives that way. But you mentioned a great point. None of it comes together at all if you're getting blown up in the middle. And that's one of those things where if we see it happen early, then, I mean, night. Like we'll be ringing in the new year. We might fire up the instant reaction pod before the final gun of the game if we start to see Ohio State unable to block the interior pressure from Georgia's defensive front. All right, what about on the other side? Because we did not spend a lot of time. We acknowledge that Ohio State has a very, very good defense, and it's a very, very talented defense, but I don't think we spent a lot of time either picking apart with criticism or holding up and celebrating Ohio State's defense as a truly elite unit. What does that matchup look like as they go up against Georgia, a team who offensively has been very, very productive and very successful this season? It's often a little unique. Honestly, it's probably a strength of how versatile they are, the different ways that they use their running backs and the tight ends. We spent a lot of time looking at the wide receiver position, and yet they still were able to get a whole bunch of yards, be very successful, and put up a whole bunch of points. What does that matchup look like when the Bulldogs have the ball going up against Ohio State?
Yeah, the interesting thing to me, or the thing I'm going to be looking for early, is what happened in the Michigan game with them getting burned so many times, bringing all that pressure. Does that cause them to be a bit more conservative in this game? And should they be more conservative defensively in this game? Because if you look at Georgia offensively, outside of Bowers, what is there in the passing game that you're really concerned about beating you deep? Like, they haven't really shown the ability, whether it's at receiver or at quarterback, to do that to teams consistently. So if I'm Ohio State, I think if I'm Jim Knowles, I'm still going to be aggressive as hell, because I do have a good defense and I do have a good pass rush. And if I'm going to beat this team, I'm probably going to need to force some turnovers, and I'm probably going to have to force the issue and put Stetson Bennett in the same situation that Georgia's going to be trying to put CJ Stroud in, where I think Bennett is better when things go off script, but I also think Bennett is capable of doing really dumb things when things go off script and making throws that he should not make. So it's going to be interesting to see if Ohio State is as aggressive defensively. They have the same issues in Georgia, in that you do worry about their secondary when they have to cover for a while. You do feel like that is the weakness of the defense, but I have a little more faith in their defensive backs against Georgia's receiving core than I do in Georgia's defensive backs against Ohio State. So I do think that is somewhat of an equalizer in this matchup.
Agree with Tom on that. I will say Georgia appears to be probably the healthiest that they've been all year at the receiver position. So I'm excited to see that. We go back to last year, and last year doesn't really count as much as this year's sample set does. But last year, one of the concerns with Stetson was his downfield accuracy, right? And I think and look, it's been better this year. Ultimately, if you play that style, and I think you probably should, there is some chance that he doesn't connect on those deep balls, much like Hendon Hooker did not connect on those deep balls against Georgia earlier this year because they had some guys open and he missed them, and they didn't have him open that often. But I think if you're Ohio State, you have to keep playing that hyper aggressive style. To me, Georgia does a lot of really interesting stuff schematically with their two tight end looks. Ohio State, can you play nickel against that? If not, you probably are going to have a lot of situations where you're having to match up with Bowers or Washington with a linebacker. I mean, that's really tough. How does Ohio State handle some of these compressed sets that they're going to throw at you? Monken does a really nice job with these chess pieces. I think you're going to see both these guys in the NFL, probably drafted pretty highly, to be honest. They're really special athletes and they're big dudes. Up front, Georgia is really good. They lost McClendon. I assume he's going to play. Maybe doesn't. Mims stepped in and was just as good. Broderick Jones at left tackle is really good. They're pretty damn good on the interior. They don't necessarily have that first round back, but they got a lot of backs that'll hit you pretty well. And it kind of comes down how many points do you think that Georgia needs to win this ball game, right? I mean, if you give Georgia 35, you feel really good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the spread right now is 62. So, yeah, or excuse me, over under 62. I don't know that Ohio State is that athletic defensively.
Ooh, but JT Tuimoloau is phenomenal.
Yeah,
and that's when I think about Ohio State's best win this season, it was in Happy Valley against Penn State, and JTT was a monster. He just single-handedly took that game over. He scored touchdowns himself. He had fumble recovery, interception. He was just all over the field doing everything. And can Tuimoloau keep up with Brock Bowers? I don't know. I'm not going to be able to match that up specifically, but
no, he cannot. I guarantee
that's a freak. I was thinking about Jack Sawyer. I was thinking about
more of an edge guy, though. You know what I'm saying?
He's more of an edge, 100%. He's a defensive end.
Who's their Jerron Payne? Who's their Christian Wilkins or Dexter Lawrence or who's their Jalen Carter? Just to use an example from this game, is who makes Brock who makes the quarterback uncomfortable from the inside? We think Jalen could probably do to Stroud. I don't know.
Nobody without blitzing.
Yeah, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe you just bring it and they don't connect, and that certainly happens. It's a single game sample set, right? For 54 plays, Ohio State's defense played pretty damn well against Michigan, and for 5 extremely damaging plays, they did not. It's entirely possible that Ohio State doesn't give up quite as many explosives in this game and is able to shut Georgia down. I don't think they will, but it's very possible.
What about we've been on this one for a little bit. I want to make sure we hit the Fiesta Bowl as well. You mentioned the total. You mentioned the spread. What do we like? What's our best bet?
I'm Georgia and the under. I think that the Ohio State's offense, it goes back. The last 3 games I've seen it against defenses that can do this to it, it has struggled. And until I see it able to overcome these kind of things, I just don't know how many points the Buckeyes are going to be able to score here. I think Georgia, I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I do see a situation where in the fourth quarter, maybe the dam kind of bursts a little bit and Georgia's able to pull away, but I don't think it's going to be high scoring. I don't think it's going to be a tennis match. And I think that plays to Georgia's benefit because while I think that the Bulldogs can score a lot of points, I think we've also seen this is a team that we've seen it plenty of times. Once it gets a comfortable lead, it has absolutely no problem just kind of squatting on it. And with another game left to play afterwards, Georgia will have all the reason in the world to squat on it if it has to. So I like Georgia in the under, but I like the spread more than the total.
I kind of like the total more with like I don't think I'm going to bet the actual the spread. I may play some like first quarter or like some alt stuff if I see it out there. Maybe they'll post that closer to game time. But I will probably play a little on under 62.5, under 63 type numbers. I could see a game where it's like 28-24 type thing. Like that's possible.
I've game scripted this out over. I think that
okay.
I think that Georgia establishes an advantage early. And like I can visualize CJ Stroud and these wide receivers tacking on a couple late touchdowns when the game is like on the verge of being garbage time. But, they're just going to continue to try to hit something fast. Maybe you start to get a little bit of softer coverage. I am 100% probably influenced and biased by what we saw in the SEC championship game. But Kirby doesn't want to put too much on tape. Once he knows the game is won, they might go a little bit vanilla. And so that's where I could see just like Ryan Day, Ohio State. This is a group whose pride is hurt, right? I mean, this is like devastation. Vibes were bad. There were 6 days where things were horrendous. Then Utah takes down USC, and all of a sudden you've got a second chance at this. I do think they are outmatched. I think Georgia is the much better team. I would take Georgia. I would lay the points, but I think that there's like almost an aesthetics play where even if the game is in hand, you're going to see Ohio State continue to try to hit some big plays. And that's why I just think the talent level of our 2 1,000-yard wide receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Buka, is just going to lead to some touchdowns that could take us over the total. So if it's under 63, I lean more over with the idea that we get kind of some panic scores as we get late in the game, in a game that Georgia probably officially has in hand.
It also it's very correlated with who gets out first. Like you said,
yes.
Georgia can squat on it, but if you like over, you probably like something like Ohio State first quarter money line, just to throw that out there, right? Like the Buckeyes having the lead, first. Those things would make some sense to me. Also, like I think you need to properly figure out, and I don't really have a great feel on this, which is why I'm not going heavy on this. What kind of tempo is Georgia going to play with? Because Georgia occasionally will break out the tempo. We think of Ohio State as the tempo team because they throw the ball around a lot, but Georgia likes to stay in their 12 personnel and play some tempo. So I'm curious how that goes. This is going to be fun. I really this is the game, right, that we're excited to watch. And this may be for the national title. Like I still have Ohio State rated higher than Michigan. So, I mean, this is kind of to me, this is kind of the national title game.
And we'll already know the result of TCU Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to talk about some interesting energy in the atmosphere on New Year's Eve, let Michigan beat TCU and let Ohio State be up 10-0 in the first quarter, and just feel it. Just feel it all over the college football world.